Hello, I'm Andrew Fisher, composer and lyricist, and welcome to the Two Rivers Café Podcast, a friendly hangout where music and conversation mix. Collaboration with other writers and artists has always been one of the great joys in my life. Each episode, I'll be joined by an artist who works with music to talk about their range of experiences. Expect honesty, insight, laughter, ideas, and the odd happy accident as we put our heads together to create something new. Will it work? Let's find out. I'm delighted to be joined today by the hugely talented traditional and contemporary folk musician, composer, arranger and producer, and Radio 2 Young Folk nominee, Alex Garden. Hello, Alex.
Hello, lovely to be here.
I've been a fan of yours since I first heard you perform as part of the brilliant folk duo, the Drystones, with Ford Collier, and I really enjoyed your recent album, Sonder, with the brilliant vibraphonist Harriet Riley and bassist Stevie Toddler. What have you been working on recently?
Well, actually, in fact, today I've been meeting up with Harriet and we've been talking about doing Sonder number 2,
Excellent.
which will be the follow-up album, which is very exciting. I can't wait for that. As you know, we've been in lockdown for ages, so I haven't been able to really go out and do my normal job, which is gigging and playing at, festivals and all sorts. I do lots of ceilidhs normally. But yeah, I've started a new band, which is
Great.
very exciting.
Tell us about that. What's in that?
It's going to be a quite traditional, down-the-line English folk trio, inspired by the likes of the English Acoustic Collective and Leveret and a bit of Spyro. There's some of our main influences. And that's going to be myself and my two good friends, Danny Pedler and Sid Goldsmith.
I've worked
we're
with
really
Danny
excited.
before. He's a brilliant guy. I'm a big fan of his. Can't wait to hear it. Let me know, and I'll be sure to buy an album or see a performance. And word to the wise, definitely see Alex live. He's one of the best live musicians I think I've ever seen. I was looking at Sonder, and there's the first track is called. Tell me if I'm saying this right. Velikor,
Yeah.
Velikor, which means a strange wistfulness of bookshops. And I really loved that expression just because I really resonated with it straight away. I get a strange wistfulness around bookshops. How did you find that word?
I can't remember, actually. I think I remember it resonating with me when I found it, and I think it might have just been through trawling through lots of books of kind of archaic words that we don't use anymore. And I just found it probably in a book in an old bookshop. And it just really resonated with me. I remember it always calls back to my memory this one particular bookstore on Ecclesall Road in Sheffield that's just got this really kind of musty vibe. And there's kind of a smell as you go into the shop of like old paper.
Yeah,
And
all the best
really
bookshops have that smell. I know what you mean. Yes.
Yeah, it really brings that, into my mind, and it created a very vivid image, which was a nice springboard to work with musically.
Well, it's funny, isn't it, how much music can come out of springboards, and that brings me very neatly on to the next question I have to ask you. So the format with this episode is that Alex and I have agreed to do an arrangement of a short tune that each other has written. So he will write a piece for me to arrange, and I will write a piece for him. Alex, as you know, with the podcast, you get to pick one of 3 possible concepts to act as a springboard for our creative project. And so I'd like to give you 3 concepts now, and I'd like you to pick one. Are you ready?
Great.
Okay,
Totally, yeah.
so the first one is The Green Man. The second, Wild Meadow. And the third, The May Queen.
I'm going to go for the Wild Meadow.
Wild Meadow, wonderful. And what appeals to you about this idea?
Well, again, I think as I was saying earlier with Velicore, a lot of these concepts and words have become quite important for my music making and my process. And it always means a lot to me. Maybe this is something to do with having a background in folk music, but it always means a lot to me where I can picture a place or a memory, but specifically like a location. And when you said Wild Meadow just then, it made me really, really think of this one place that I used to love going to up in the Quantock Hills in Somerset, which is not far from where I grew up. And yeah, I just got this very strong image in my mind of where that music's gonna come from.
It's so interesting for me how different things can stimulate creative ideas. Do you have a particular process there? What is your process? Tell us more about it.
I suppose my process is very material derived. I'd say that I'm an abstract sort of artist, as it were, in terms of writing, because everything is kind of derived from the material. I just love exploring melodic material and rhythmic material particularly, and that's sort of, the 2 main pillars of my work, and then I tend to work with other people, in terms of harmonizing or making a sort of polyphony or wherever it's gonna go. Um, but just back to the Wild Meadow thing as well, I think, there's an element of exploring movement through melody and rhythm, and that kind of really evokes a strong image in my mind of, like, the wind. It's
Yes,
quite a windy day here, actually,
yes, yes. No, here too.
and I'm imagining this sort of oscillation of the grass in the meadow, sort of, being powered by the wind.
So it's a very sort of physical and pictorial thing there that's going on. It's so
Yeah,
interesting. Because another thing that I perhaps wrongly, but I associate very strongly with folk music generally is the nuance of the place, the difference between a county and one county and another is so important, and it can be crudely stereotyped into, oh, here's a Mixolydian tune, and I'm like, no, never tell that to a folk musician, because it really matters that this song comes from Gloucestershire, not somewhere else, for example. And I mean, do you feel that very strongly, that there has to be a Somerset quality to this thing you've got in your mind?
not necessarily. It depends on what material you're treating. I think sometimes, definitely, if it's a song about a place or a song about a time and a place, I think it's really important to be sensitive to where this has come from and kind of out of respect of the fact that this material is a lot older than I am and
Absolutely.
has been passed down for a lot longer than my creative process has been a
Yeah,
thing.
and also there's
Um,
lots of people involved. There's communities. There's lives one wishes to honour with that as well.
Totally, yeah, all of the different mouths and ears that that song has been passed down through, all of those fiddlers' fingers that have played it hundreds of years before mine. But, like, in terms of writing new material, I feel like having a personal connection to that, be it a time or a place that you're trying to capture or just something completely abstract is kind of more important than going down the analytical, kind of more classical composition route of, trying to explore form or trying to, best exploit a mode like the Mixolydian mode. It's more about trying to sort of, develop a connection. I think that's where folk music's led me personally.
Alex, I'd like to talk to you about your relationship with creativity. Have you always been creative?
Oh, you'd have to ask my parents. I think I have always enjoyed the idea of creating something, whether that was, I remember as a kid, I was fascinated by, animation actually, and I really just wanted to make short films, and I remember being fascinated by, um, using technology to capture things and almost, like, decorate time and space with, like, video recorders and tape recorders and things like that. Fascinated me as a child, probably more than instruments did, to be honest.
But
Um,
when did you start learning? Did you start learning the violin? Was that your first instrument?
I did, yeah, that was my first instrument and always has been, and, I was actually very lucky to be able to go to, like, a fiddle school for very young kids. I think I was probably about 5 or 6, at Wells Cathedral School, um, which isn't where I ended up going to school, but, I then ended up off the back of that, my parents saw that I enjoyed it and managed to get me lessons with an amazing teacher called Jan Dobbins.
Right.
Um, and I really just sort of started to enjoy it from age sort of 6, 7 upwards and wanted to be a violinist. And I think there was a sense of like, always trying to do something that was a little bit different with the violin and using it as more of a kind of sound making tool rather than a classical instrument. And I
Mm,
think that's where, folk music started to come in when I was a sort of a young teenager. I got really, really keen on the idea of playing by ear, playing tunes in a
mm,
non-formal way, trying to sort of explore music in a new way for me, or in a
mm.
in a kind of way that didn't involve following rules. Maybe, I guess so.
Right.
Um,
So I suppose that's a creative habit in a way. Does that still apply now that when you come to do a creative act, whether you're performing someone else's tune or you're performing in a band, is that kind of um, a reality in your mind as you play, or is it now sort of unconscious, like driving a car that you just drive without really thinking about it? Or
I think there are certain habits, I don't know how detailed to go with this really, but, if I'm playing a new tune, say it's a tune that a friend has written and I'm learning it, there's no way I'll end up playing it the same way that they play it. And quite a good example of that would be, where do you put your ornamentation, which is a big thing in folk music, all the little twiddles and, little cuts and rolls and, stuff you can do with your bow. It's all very personal, and I almost liken it to an accent. Almost like a regional accent. In fact, particularly in Ireland and Scotland, you can actually map out the regional dialects of fiddle playing, which is quite cool. But, everyone develops their own kind of voice in that sense, and I try and make sure that whatever I do, it's kind of mine, and it sounds like me rather than imitating someone else.
I think that's an interesting thing about voice as well, because no matter how we would try, we all have a voice which becomes detectable just even as we talk, and you get used to the sound of your own spoken or singing voice. But when you hear any three different violins being played by three different people, you start to go, "Oh my goodness, they are so different in tones and tone and touch and sensibility." And so I love that idea that your voice is already yours; it's already there. It's just kind of accessing that.
Yeah, totally, yeah. Yeah, it's already there, and you've spent a long time developing it. Um, Tone, I think actually it's interesting to mention the voice because as a violinist primarily, a lot of people do say that the violin was originally designed to emulate the sound of a human voice. You've got continuous pitch, you've got so much you can do with dynamic, you've got so much you can do with overtones and kind of, I like to call it breath sound, which is the kind of sound that you get with the bow that isn't necessarily always intentional but adds so much character. No two violins sound the same and no two violinists sound the same. So you're always going to get something unique.
Moving the subject on a little bit, can I ask a different question? Do you find ideas and inspiration come easily to you? Do you are you always on, as it were, or are there points where you have to, I don't know, have a bath and have a glass of wine before you're sort of ready, or is it always working?
I'm not one of the people that gets, kept up at night by ideas. Well, sometimes, but it's very rare that I will be so inspired that I have to write it down. But I would say that otherwise, I don't struggle to sit down and write something. Everyone has good and bad days, but I try and make tune writing as in, the context of folk music, tune writing is normally short phrases, 8 bars at a time that repeat. You get a 32 bar tune overall. It doesn't take very long. And there's something really nice about working with short form, and I've done it before. At the moment, I'm actually having a little bit of a quiet couple of weeks for writing, though I'm getting back into it again this week. But I've done it before where I set myself, 6 months, gotta write a tune a day, and, I did that during lockdown, and it was fantastic, and I ended up with tons of material. In terms of, like, other forms of creative music making, I've been doing a lot of ambient music recently,
Right.
and trying to actually make the creative process as easy for myself as possible, just in order to explore new things. So a lot of that kind of music making has been done using creative technology, been using a lot of effect pedals as plugins, and been like really experimenting with signal chain, and it's always like fun developing ideas in that way because you can't really you're always going to do something new basically.
Yeah.
You're never going to get stuck in that trap of creating the same sound or working with the same scale or the same motif that you've been stuck with for the past year. And you know
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it does happen, but I've always try and set limitations to be inspired by,
Well, it's
I
so
guess,
interesting you say
probably.
that. Something that Phil picked on in the last episode, and I literally about to say that as well. That limitations are very necessary to be creative, and then you can find where you can be creative and what you can be creative with. So give a creative person tools, and they'll figure out how to use them creatively, and they may well use them unconventionally. And that for me is always fascinating, in terms of where discoveries happen. I wanted to ask you a violin specific question, and this is from me as a pianist. That one of the things I'm aware of, and I'm basically paraphrasing something that Michael Finnessy said to me, which is about the relationship between the hand and the eye on the instrument. But do you look at your hand when you're improvising on the violin? I'm imagining that you can. Does that give you a really bad neck ache, or is that something where you're actually just you're doing something in your imagination, or are you aware of where your fingers are moving on the fretboard?
I I actually don't look at my hand, my left hand. If I look anywhere at my instrument when I'm playing, it's actually at the bridge. Um, there's kind of I mean,
What do you
there's a lot
see?
going on.
What do you see?
So, I'm actually looking at what the bow is doing
Right.
because that's much more I can get a lot more feedback information
How
from that.
interesting. Wow.
And, the consistency at which you move the bow across the string is what equates to the tone that you have.
Yeah.
It's all, speed over pressure or whatever. You could
Mm.
probably come up with an equation for good tone.
Yeah.
But that to me is a lot more interesting to know what I'm doing because that's like the kind of sound as opposed to
Mm.
the notes. The notes are, they're all there. I sort of know where they are now.
Yes.
And I actually play mostly in first position anyway, so
Right.
I don't have a huge amount of shifts to handle. When you shift position on violin, you have to generally, I'd say, be very careful about it because you don't want to overshoot or undershoot.
No, no,
It's
no.
very noticeable
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
do.
yeah.
But as a folk musician, I'm very used to playing everything in first position, and I've got my two and a bit octave range that I can use there, and that sort of. I tend to actually look into the middle distance most of the time, and sometimes eyes closed, although that can be problematic when you get into gigging again. You don't want to be
Yes.
doing a whole gig with your eyes shut.
Alex. Exactly. I say the same in jazz. It's that's so interesting though for me, because again, what we perceive, what we're paying attention to in the moment is it sound, is it harmony, is it tone, is it and how that changes from instrument to instrument. Listening to what other musicians are doing is as important as what you're doing. Where do I fit in? What's happening here? And I think the great ensemble players are those who listen really, really sympathetically and intelligently and so unselfishly as well. I think that's the thing that there's something about ensemble playing that's a rare art. I think it was Andre Previn who said it's very hard to make music with people you don't like. I think
That's definitely true.
that's definitely true. Very good. So, Alex and I are now going to go away and both write a tune based on the idea of Wild Meadow. And we will then give each other our idea and then arrange each other's idea in our own way. Back soon. In the real world, one day has passed in which Alex has written a tune for me and I have written one for him. And we've both spent a few hours arranging each other's tune. So remember that the prompt that Alex chose was Wild Meadows. So here is the tune that Alex wrote. In the original, it goes forwards then backwards, but now let's play an extract. So, Alex, I absolutely love that. I think it's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's elegiac. I just wanted to ask you how you came to write it.
So I thought it was a really interesting prompt word because it brought to mind this kind of very vivid piece of imagery of an actual meadow that I'd kind of pictured in my mind as a memory from childhood. And I remember this kind of one of the most interesting things about it for me visually and kind of aesthetically was that the wind would make all the grass kind of oscillate in this pattern, almost like a wave kind of pattern. Um, and I've always been fascinated by oscillations because that's how we hear music and how we interpret sound. And I wanted to kind of use a device, a compositional device that I've been exploring a lot recently, which is palindromic tunes.
So, by palindrome, you mean like a mirror. There's a midway point where the tune is the same going backwards as it is going forwards.
Exactly, yeah. So, like the word kayak, or I came up with a phrase, was it a cat I saw? Um, which is spelt exactly the same backwards as it is forwards. Um, But yeah, I've been writing a lot of these kind of tunes at the moment, and as we talked a bit about yesterday, it's being sort of inspired by the limitations of form in the context of folk music, which is often very repetitive anyway. So it lends itself to these back to front kind of things. And I think there's a sense that that movement from the wild, windy meadow is kind of being explored as an oscillation in this tune, both ways around, backwards and forwards, but also in kind of micro, macro form. Um,
Mm. It's so interesting because there's a lot of overlap with what I did as well. That I was also really struck by that image of a lone figure against a sort of vast nature. That was a very kind of stirring and primal image that I had in my head. And also, I was thinking about wind when I saw that you'd added the word wind to it. I was struck by that, and so my response was thinking about meter and changing meter and how wind constantly moves irregularly. So I was trying to think about rhythmic irregularities, and so in my tune I had a sort of wider scheme of irrational numbers like 13 and 11 and 7 sort of subdivided into these threes and twos. So here's, if I just can play the tune that I wrote. So when you heard that, what did you think?
I really liked it. I kind of immediately heard it as a sort of Englishy Purcell-esque kind of slip jig. The 9/8 struck me right at the beginning, um, and as I played that through, I started changing around, like obviously massively changed a lot of the rhythms in there to make it a lot more kind of yakety dakety dakety yakety dakety da, which would be your kind of slip jig rhythm. Um,
Can I just ask a technical term because you're a folk specialist and I don't know what a slip jig is.
Okay, so a jig is basically a tune or a dance that's done for a tune in 6/8 normally in compound time, but a slip jig would be in 9/8, so it has three groups of three beats. So it's kind of the basis of a lot of actually more Celtic. Something that would appear a lot in Cayleys, Irish and Scottish Cayleys, as opposed to English
Okay,
music.
so can I ask a question of sort of reverence here? I was very naughty and I then stuck in a 2/4 bar, so it's going da 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 da. Were you like, don't mess with it, Fisher? You're crossing a line here. Am I allowed to do that? Do you think?
Well, if you were dancing a slip jig, that would very much throw you off, but we're not dancing a slip jig, so it's fine. What I ended up doing actually was kind of looking at that, and I love asymmetrical rhythms. I love kind of, lots of sudden changes, and I was playing it around as written. And then I was hearing those as dotted groups of 3, so I ended up where you were going "tikka-da, tikka-da, tikka-da, tikka, tikka-da." I was hearing "yakka-da, dakka-da, tikka-da, tikka, tikka, tikka-da, tikka-da." So it's adding a 6 bar instead of a 9 bar, which is just, another way of elongating the phrase and maybe just make it fit more with the kind of, the lilting asymmetrical rhythm that I was trying to play. So think of it more as something what feels nice to play rather than what's the most kind of dramatic rhythm, essentially. Um, and I did a similar thing in the B where I actually reversed, so I made the 7/8 bars that you started the B with the digga 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 digga. That's 7/8 followed by a 3/4 bar. I actually kind of reversed that, so I made the compound time bit the first bit, and then the second bit felt like a 7 bar. Um, so really, yeah, just messing around with the rhythms to make it feel, I don't know, maybe just a little bit more lilting.
So, shall we have a quick listen of your arrangement of my piece? I'm looking forward to this. Here it is. I love that so much. I think you're amazing, Alex. I really do. Which part did you put down first?
I put down the higher part first. So I kind of naturally approach things, melody, sort of top down, I guess, in terms of, actual frequency of the notes. But I think I had this idea in mind for an intro. I wanted to actually, I just remember listening back to it. I had a really clear inspiration in mind right at the beginning, which is one of the tracks off one of my favorite albums of all time, which is called Woodworks by the Danish String Quartet. And they arranged these really kind of nice, simple Scandinavian tunes in a very modal way and have a lot of sort of simple polyphony, so either ostinati underneath things or just having like a pad or a drone, lots of nice unison as well. Um, that's sort of where I was going, and I started with the melody, played the melody round loads and experimented with the rhythms and the ornamentation, and then put in the second part afterwards.
I mean, I was very struck by the ornamentation that you were adding with with that as well. That it struck me that there was an awful lot of detail when you see a score. And I say this because the score you sent me had no ornamentation in. Are you aware in your head where you're going to put an ornament, and are you aware also what kind of ornament that's going to be?
There's a lot to unpack there. I think with a lot of ornamentation, I hate to say it, but it is just kind of what feels right.
Okay,
Um, There are kind of guidelines. I think often putting an ornament, on the lead up to the sort of, apex of a tune, so maybe
yeah,
the highest note or the loudest bit,
yeah.
feels right, especially if you've got a longer note, you might kinda wanna sweep into it or sweep out of the note. Generally, one of the nicest, most satisfying bits of the rhythm of playing jigs, or slip jigs in this case, um, is always emphasizing, let's say we're in 6, always emphasizing beats 3 and 6 as opposed to 1 and 3. With that's a bowing device, but you've got yakadada, gadada, gadada, gada, and also not playing your rhythms as da ga da da ga da. So you're not going, straight 6 all the time. You're slightly dotting. somewhere between a triplet and a dot. And you can shift it around as well. I think that's what really characterizes this tune for me. Um, Actual ornaments, there's a couple of trills in there, like Scandi trills, which are like half trills where you go digga up. So up, down, up as you hit the note. We obviously do that very quickly. There's a couple of rolls, there's a couple of cuts, which is where you pretend that you've changed bow direction by just flicking the string with one of the fingers that you're not using. Um, what else have I done? I put in a little 2-octave harmonic, which is always fun.
It's blooming impressive. It's
And
yeah, no, I loved it. I just thought it was so impressive. Also the way with the cad's point you're moving between two parts in unisons, and I can also imagine being in tune with yourself. There's a kind of what was I doing last time kind of thing. Do you find that I know when I record against myself, I'm like, oh, I sort of wish I'd got it better first time round, but it's
yeah, it's a lot to hold in your head. Thanks to the joys of technology, if I was arranging, um, you know, with all the time in the world, I would do it bit by bit, and I'd do every little bit by bit, and end up with like a completely polished recording. As you can hear with this, I'm playing each part continuously all the way through. There's been no editing done, and to show that, I've filmed myself doing each take as well. So there was an opportunity to kind of really, really go in on each tiny little bit. But what I did was just play each one round probably about 5 times until I knew what was going to happen at each point. um, I didn't actually write out an arrangement at
you
all.
didn't rescore it. Wow, that's very
No,
impressive.
I was just reading it off off the chart, but just reading it wrong.
And now I'm going to play an extract of my arrangement of Alex's tune. You can hear the full piece at the end of the podcast, but for now, here's just a bit of my Wild Meadow. There you go. What did you think?
I love it. I love music that is just so larger than life and epic, and it really goes there. Um, it's very very flattering as a violinist to hear this like huge orchestra behind you. It's amazing.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. I was sort of struck how pictorial everything became, and it's funny because I was beginning to think a bit film composery, and there are various sort of things, especially with some of the timbres, as well. You're like, oh, is that a bit too dot dot dot? But it's a joy to work on because of the way that you were playing it. Actually, there was some technical challenges with managing the tempo, and so what
Yeah.
I started to do, so I did a tempo map of the first half, following every single beat you were doing, and it was a real headache. And then after about halfway through, I stopped and I just ignored what you were doing, and I just kept the tempo consistent. And what was really interesting was I didn't even notice that they became to become two separate things. That the second half of the tune becomes a tiny bit out, and I rather liked that kind of idea behind it. That there's again this, and perhaps it links to the figure walking in the field by themselves. But it's
There's a looseness to it that I really enjoy, and I love stuff like that. I think when done deliberately, um, having a looseness to timing, not just of rubato, but in a polyphonic sense, having like people not necessarily playing together, but just kind of reacting. That's how it felt to me. It's really, really beautiful. It's lovely.
So just to draw things to a close, Alex, it's been wonderful to have you. You've been an absolutely superb guest. Absolutely in awe of your abilities and talents. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
You're very welcome, Andy. Thanks so much for having me on the show, and I obviously look forward to the next time we can collaborate, but also look forward to seeing you in the real world sometime very soon. Maybe, in a venue or a festival field somewhere. That would be
I
lovely.
definitely will be there with bells on,
Great.
dressed as a Morris dancer. Okay, now we've reached the end. I'd like to hear both arrangements in full. So, first of all, here is Alex's arrangement of my work. And here is my arrangement of Alex's work. Thanks for joining me in the Two Rivers Café this week. It's been a lot of fun. I'd like to thank the hugely talented Alex Garden for his time, talent, insight, and genial company. If you want to see a video of Alex playing his piece, please follow the link in the episode description, and this is also the place to find out more about my life as a composer. My name is Andrew Fisher, and this episode of the Two Rivers Café podcast was produced, as always, by Jim and Rupert of Driver 8. Look out for the next episode when it appears, but in the meantime, I encourage you all to get creative and find someone to collaborate with. Goodbye.